Parameters. We've been studying universal grammar, so let's look at the parameters, restriction, limitations imposed on language. The language faculty incorporates a set of universal principles which guide the child in acquiring a language. We have discussed that there are certain principles which are inborn, are hardwired among the children of all languages. But the question is, are all aspect of the grammar of language universal? We have seen or we have discussed previously that some are and some are not. Right? If this were so, if it were so, then what does it mean? It means that all the children of the world do not have to learn any language, particularly any specific language. So all natural languages would have the same grammar, and there would be no grammatical learning involved in language acquisition. So no need for children to learn anything about their grammar of their language because it was innate. Only lexical learning, some phrases, some words, vocabulary, collocations, etc. would have to be learned by children. Their idiosyncratic linguistic properties, whether a given item has an irregular plural like criterion and criteria, or past tense, go, went, gone, etc. So only these things have to be learned by a child, what were irregular in the language of a child. Some universal principles do determine the broad outlines of the grammar of natural languages, and we have discussed that they demarcate some principles which are innate. Some language particular aspects of grammar which children have to learn as part of the task of acquiring their native language. However, there are some language particular aspects which are particular to languages, one language to another. They vary from one language to another. So these are the aspects which have to be learned by the children, which have to be acquired by children when they are learning the grammar of their language. Thus, language acquisition involves not only lexical learning but also some grammatical rules. It's not only learning vocabulary, this, that, or other vocabulary, some grammatical, how different phrases are formed, how clauses are made, where verbs come, what is this order of constituent of a certain language. They have to be learned by the children. Grammatical learning will be limited to those parameters of grammar which vary from one language to another, called parametrised aspects of grammar. So where the phrase, whether the head comes on the left or the right. So these are called parameterized aspect of grammar. So they have to be learned by the children. The obvious way to determine just what aspect of grammar of their native language children have to learn is to determine the range of these parametric variation found in the grammars of different natural languages, especially by the adults. How do adults use their language? This has to be learned. And what are these aspects? We just study them. Contrast between English and Italian. Let's look at two languages. How these two languages form their clauses, right? Maria thinks that speak French. So it's a sentence. Obviously, if we take it as an English sentence, we say Maria thinks that they speak French, right? But if we find its counterpart in Italian language, it will be like this: Maria pensa che parlano francese. So if we translate this one, we find this: Maria thinks that speak French. If you look at this, that thinks is a finite verb, and it has a subject which is Maria, but speak, which is a finite verb, especially in English, doesn't have a subject of reference. So in English, this sentence will be incorrect or will be difficult to produce, especially when English speakers learn such a language in which this case happens. So how do they learn? This is a question, or we'll answer to it. Since the verb parleno, speak, has no overt subject, it must have a null subject. So we say that it has a null subject, which can be thought of as a silent or invisible counterpart of the pronoun they. So we'll have to think of a silent subject they, or an invisible pronoun which appears in the corresponding English sentence, as we just saw, they speak, right? Beside that, the null subject is conventionally designed as pro. In place, it is used in place of another. So that Italian sentence has the following structure: Maria pensa che pro parleno francese. So this will we will imagine that pro is in place of the subject, third person plural pronoun, which is they in English. Maria thinks that pro speaks French, where pro is null subject pronoun. We can describe the differences between the two types of languages by saying that Italian is a null subject language. It does not have a subject, right? Whereas English is a non-null subject language. In English, if we make such a sentence, it will be incorrect. Whereas in Italian, it's a usual form of making a sentence by using a null subject. So on the basis of these differences, we can say that one subject is a non-null subject language and other is null subject language. A more familiar aspect of grammar is parametrized, relates to word order. Obviously, we have talked about that the order of constituent in a sentence or element in a sentence varies from language to language. So one type of word order variation can be illustrated in the following in the contrast between the English and Chinese questions. Let's look at this. What do you think he will say, right? If we translate it literally, right, we say in Chinese, ni jiang ta hui shuo xian mi. So this is the B is the Chinese sentence, and if we literally translate it, ni yu jiang thing ta he hui will shuo say and xian mi what. Now you compare these two sentences. In English, WH sentence, we know that actually it has moved from the place he says something and he say what, and what was moved to the initial position of the sentence. Whereas in Chinese, xian mi, we know that it's a question word, but it has not moved from its place to the beginning of the sentence. It is not fronted. So on the basis of these differences, we can say that these two languages are different. So thus another parameter of variation between languages is WH parameter, a parameter which determines whether WH expressions are fronted or not. We have just seen that in English they are fronted and in Chinese they are not. Now let's look at another parameterized feature. Just look at the relationship of head and their complement phrases. For example, if you look at the phrase student of philosophy, we know that this phrase has student as a head word, and of philosophy is a complement because we are talking about students, not of philosophies. Similarly, we have stay with me. We have head word stay as a verb, which is a verb, and with me it's complement phrase. Similarly, fond of fast food, fond is adjective, it's the head word, and of fast food is the complementary phrase. So if you look at all these examples, you can say that English is a head first language because in all these examples, the head of the phrase, in first phrase student, second stay verb, and third fond verb has come first. But is it the same in every language? Let's now look at an aspect of Korean language. For example, we have a phrase like close the door, right? If we translate it into Korean language, it's something like this: Manuel the Dara. So Manuel is the complement and didera, which mean close, is the verb. So it is like this: complement comes first and verb comes, verbs follow it, complement precedes it. Desire for change, for example. So similarly we see that the glamming, which is the desire, is the head of the phrase, which has followed the complement, that is prepositional phrase. So prepositional phrase, again preposition comes follows its complement. So on the basis we can say that this is another type of parameter and variation between and among languages. In some languages the head first comes first, and in other the head comes last. So on the basis we say English is a head first language and Korean is a head last language. The language faculty allows only a binary set of possibilities, whether something is or whether something is not. So on the basis we have seen that the division that we have made is binary. So namely that a given kind of structure in a given language is either consistently head first or consistently head last. So this is the binary aspect of languages. So generalizing all these rule of WH movement and this head first and head last, it seems possible that all grammatical variation between languages can be characterized in terms of a set of parameters, and that for each parameter the language faculty specifies binary choices, either this or that, head first or head last, of the possible values for the parameters. So this is how we can know about languages, that these aspects of languages have to be learned by the child, though he's endowed with certain rules, but these parameters have to be learned.